fantasy short stories. An Interlude of Intrigue, A Tale of Three Kings, by Lesley Herron. Chapter 7, Rhapsody. Even pushing our steeds to breaking point, it took a full 6 days for Undine and I to reach Fort Ironhill. Upon arrival, we were greeted with the grim sight of innumerable tents and banners on the horizon. Thousands of soldiers had amassed from the west, united under the black flag of the Brotherhood, and more were arriving each day. Ironhill was the gateway from our lands to the west, the stage for any true invasion. When the original alliances were forged, a wide path had been carved through the shade-spined forest. It created a direct route from Fuscar and Aethia to the main thoroughfares of Ebra. Nearly all trade that was not done by ship came through this outpost. With easy access to the massive river that bisected our country, goods could travel quickly to the north or south, or even charter a ferry to cross further inland. As you know, the inescapable dredgelands were to the south, their black waters dumping into the ocean. And to the north, the sombre expanse of the shade-spined forest stretched on for hundreds of miles. This made transporting an army's worth of provisions and gear a difficult trek. Beyond that, there were only a small number of other locations that had established access routes, but all of them wound through rough, frigid terrain. If Ironhill fell, it would be the breaking of a dam. Enemy forces would surge into Ebra like a toxic plague. As such, you can understand my disappointment upon receiving my brother's ultimatum. With a scream of frustration, Elias gripped tight the chair he was clinging to for support and flung it hard against the wall. His breathing labored. He slammed both fists onto the table, scanning the missive for a third time. That familiar rage coursed through his veins once more, and he crumpled the scroll between his fingers. Lucian has signed his fate. I will see him executed for this. Folding her arms across her chest, Undine took a step away from the table. You know as well as I that you cannot kill the son of the Wild Queen. Banish him, demote him to Stableland, or even move him to one of the less active outposts near the south. Anything is better than starting a war with the enshrined wilds. Elias studied the dryad for a moment, taking a slow breath as he did. She had her chance to reclaim her son when I sent him to patrol her borders in the Eastern Pass. As long as Lucian draws breath, this country is not safe. There are 2 names on that letter. Undine gestured with a wave of her hand and raised a scolding eyebrow. Do you plan on killing Verin as well? Now, there was a thought. Elias remained silent as he allowed her words to resonate. She had made a fair point, but not the one she had intended. Perhaps it would be necessary, perhaps not. He loved his little brother, but he couldn't allow his feelings to blind him to Verin's ineptitude any longer. He let out a long sigh. There were other things far more important at hand. He looked up, glancing over to the satyr that had been standing in the corner, doing his best to disappear. You there, messenger. What is your name? Me? The young man looked up, wide-eyed in terror. They call me Bernard, Your Majesty. I swear, I didn't know what was in that letter. A small smile creased Elias's face. He lifted a hand in a placating gesture. You can relax, Bernard. I hold no ill will towards you. You have done me a great service by delivering this to me. But I have a question I must ask, and please, answer me honestly. Bernard blinked rapidly. Of course, sir. Where do your allegiances lie? Do you support my efforts? Elias paused, waving his hand towards the crumpled remnants of the scroll. Or do you agree with my brother that I have gone too far? I will not fault you if your conscience tells you I am in the wrong." Bernard took a moment, swallowed hard, then stood a little taller. "My grandparents came from the West, refugees fleeing the Inquisition. I grew up on stories of what had happened back home. I have a little girl now of my own, and I'd do anything to stop her from having to live through that. I stand with you, Your Majesty." His smile widened, and Elias dropped his hand. "Then, with your help, we may yet see your daughter live the life she deserves." His face fell somber once more as he pulled open a drawer, grabbing a stack of blank vellum. He snatched his quill from its reservoir and began scribbling hastily, repeating the same message across many pages. "By royal decree, you are to send all available soldiers and militia to Fort Ironhill without delay. Disregard any directives you have received from the council. Traitors seek to destroy Ebra from within. Time is of the essence. His Majesty, King Elias Folkgrave." It wasn't long before he had half a dozen scrolls, sealed with his royal signet, and pushed them towards Bernard. Elias began compiling a second stack, moving his attention back to the satyr. "I need you to ride as fast as you can to the south. Seek out King Lodhir of the Silky Isles and explain what has happened." He turned back to the papers, dipping his quill into the inkwell. "Stop at every outpost along the way to deliver one of these letters. Have them furnish you a fresh steed and supplies. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Bernard nodded and nervously picked up the stack, tucking them into his oilskin rider's bag. With one hand, Elias reached into a different drawer and pulled out a small pouch of coins, which he tossed to the satyr. "If we survive this war, your daughter will know you as the hero that turned the tide. Seek me when this is all over, and you shall have your due. May Thiara bless your journey, my friend." Fumbling with shaking fingers, Bernard clumsily caught the heavy bag. He looked down at what was more coin than he had seen in a year. He gave the king a quick bow of understanding and slipped out the door. Undine sighed. "I take it we are not retreating?" Elias glanced up from his furious writing. "If we lose this fort, we lose Ebra. What would you have me do?" "We cannot defeat so many with so few. You know this as well as I." "We only need to hold them off until reinforcements arrive." Undine crossed her arms again. "And how long will that take?" Elias finished the last of his letters and began pulling them into an orderly stack. He kept his attention trained elsewhere. "A week, at best." "And how long do you think we can hold this fort?" Dropping his quill back into its well, Elias placed both hands on the table. He looked up, returning her stern gaze with a somber expression. "By some miracle, I pray longer than that." He didn't wait for her to reply before turning away. Elias exited the small quarters and trudged through the muddy grass, seeking out the stables. The fort was massive, more of a small town than a traditional outpost. It was constructed from the ginormous trees that had been cleared to make the path between the nations, and contained just about everything a military outpost could need. Blacksmiths and ironsmiths worked with the hide tanners and leather workers to create the armor and weapons used to defend his country. Bowmen tested their strength against the arrows at the archery range, and a small cluster of buildings supplied drink and food to tired soldiers. Elias found the stablemaster mucking out one of the stalls and handed over the stack of missives with instructions to have riders leave immediately. They were to travel in multiple directions to rally as many outposts, soldiers, and volunteers as possible. With that, Elias rolled up his sleeves and went about preparing fortifications for a siege. While the structure was well built, it was intended as a trading outpost that could be used to quell small incursions, not full-scale invasions. He and his men worked through the night, evacuating all non-combatants and reinforcing weak points with extra lumber. They needed only to keep the enemy out, not drive them back. As the hours ticked away, he prayed for several more days to prepare. But as dawn rose, the sound of a mounted procession could be heard marching across the expanse. Moving to the ramparts above the western gate, Elias looked down on the riders as they approached. A banner from every country flapped lazily in the wind. The leader came to a lethargic stop, just close enough for them to hear one another and not strain his neck to look up. He wore bronze ringmail over a heavy black gambeson embroidered with gold stitching. The figure raised a hand in polite greeting.
"Your Majesty, I am Father Dreven. I would like to work with you to prevent bloodshed between our peoples."
Elias felt his upper lip twitch into a scowl.
"Those who want to negotiate peace do not arrive with an army." "You misunderstand."
Dreven shook his head.
"True peace can only be achieved when there are none left to oppose you. What reason would you have to lay down your arms and accept your fate if we did not pose a threat? Besides, there is no negotiation, only an offer."
"And what do you propose?" Despite their cordial tones, Elias could feel his fingernails digging into the wood of the parapet.
"The chance for every man and woman within your walls to live full lives. They need only convert, accept the scholar into their hearts, and join my ranks."
"Every living soul within these walls has already chosen to rebuke your insanity." Elias clenched his hands into fists at the casual way this Brotherhood monk spoke of conversion, as though he were merely asking them to swap outfits. "So now, my counteroffer. Take your god and return to the West, where you will see just how resolute the Fae can be." Father Dreven smiled as he tugged on his horse's reins.
"You will bow to him in the end."
Elias glowered down. "Over my dead body." I know. Famous last words and all. Not my wittiest retort, but my mind was already on the battle to come. Since you know full well the heartbreaks and horrors of war, I shall spare you the details. I prayed to Tiara for us to last a week, but we couldn't even make it to the morrow's sunrise. It wasn't just because they outnumbered us. No. There was a reason the Brotherhood was so keen on Still Harbor. There was far more than trinkets and toys to be had from those portals. As of that day, ballistas and catapults were the height of technology in warfare. But no more. For the first time, my world witnessed a higher form of siege weapons. Their ballistas had been reinforced and outfitted with massive chains, essentially monstrous grappling hooks that reeled themselves in, used to pull down our outer defenses. Their catapults hurled metal explosives that decimated my troops, and the sound of cannon fire echoed through the chaos. With the perimeter crumbling and the wooden city burning around us, I gave the order to retreat. But they had us surrounded, and I, unknowingly, fed my soldiers to the slaughter. How many escaped that day, I do not know. I fell on the battlefield, gotten the better of by a nameless Brotherhood monk who nearly caved my head in with a mace. By rights, I should have died. I did not witness what happened next, but I was able to piece it together after the fact. "Hang in there, Your Highness." Undine let out a pained wheeze as she shifted his weight on her shoulders. Her hands, slick with blood, struggled to hold onto the king and her weapon. She shoved the spear back into the earth, forcing herself to take another agonizing step with its support. She glanced over her shoulder. The fort was completely engulfed in flames now, the acrid smoke rising into the sky and spilling across the battlefield like a toxic fog. Just a few more painful steps, and she would have them both in the safety of the dense tree line. But through the din of chaos, Undine heard the laughter of 2 armored men approaching from her left. She slid Elias off her shoulder, gently laying him in the grass. She clutched her spear, and, with sharp ears, thrust it into the gloom of the thick smoke. There was a meaty thunk and an ear-piercing screech that told her she had struck true. Attempting to wrench free her spear, her fingers gave way to fatigue, and she stumbled back, tripping over the king. Her head smacked the hard ground, and stars erupted in Undine's vision. Before they could clear, the second man was atop her. She could feel his hot breath on her skin as he shouted obscenities while carving into her side with his sword. She clamped her teeth around her screams and whipped out her hand, feeling her fingers curl around the blade, its iron edge digging into her palm. She mustered her strength and rolled to her side, pinning his weapon beneath her. There was a cry of rage, the shuffling of feet, and Undine felt the man pounce under her back, his fists pummeling her sore body. Her teeth bit into her tongue, hard, as she rolled again, toppling the man off her and freeing the sword. Her fingers were still holding it by the blade, and using her reserves of energy, she jammed the thing into the monk over and over. There was a shower of hot blood, and then the body went limp, collapsing into an unmoving lump at her side. Undine lay there, her breath heavy as she summoned the will to move. Her body was bleeding from a dozen places. She could barely feel her left leg, and one eye had already swollen shut. The thought of standing nearly caused her to black out, so she settled on rolling to her stomach. The tree line was so close, she could make out its silhouette through the acrid haze. "You can do this," she told herself as her fingers latched onto the still unconscious king. She crawled, single-minded on the task. Dry grass gave way to thick, gnarled roots in shaded shelter of the forest. Undine spat out a mouthful of blood and continued to crawl until she found a small berm caused by a bramble of roots from a massive tree. She let out a soft exhale and pulled herself and Elias into its embrace. With her impossible task at an end, Undine allowed herself to drift closer to unconsciousness. But the snapping of branches erupted through the relative stillness of the forest. The rustle of brush nearby drew her attention to several large, hunched figures as they emerged from the darkness, moonlight glinting off their weapons. Not brotherhood. Worse. Orcs.
An Interlude of Intrigue, A Tale of Three Kings, is book 3.5 by Lesley Herron, a short novella to set the stage for the upcoming book 4 of the series. If you would like to listen to the first 3 books, please be sure to check the links in the description. And stay tuned every few weeks to hear the latest chapters as they are being written and recorded. We hope you enjoyed the story. I'm Chris Herron, and that's it for today's Tall Tale TV.